thank you to Burren for giving me this opportunity to speak. I've just relatively recently joined National Parks and Wildlife Service as their Grassland Ecologist. So it's a great opportunity for me to get to sing the praises of semi-natural grasslands, to talk about how important they are. And I think they're often quite invisible. So I think they need a little bit of attention. Everybody notices if a woodland gets cut down, everybody notices if a peat bog gets cut, but I don't know how many people notice if a grassland gets ploughed, a nice species-rich grassland. So I think it's nice, I want to get people thinking and talking about semi-natural grasslands. So hopefully my screen has moved on for everybody now. So just an overview of what I'll touch tonight, so you know the lay of the land. So I'm going to start pretty broad. What is a grassland? I'm going to talk about where they're found globally, and I'm going to talk about why Ireland has so much grassland, just to give a bit of context. And I'm going to talk about what semi-natural grasslands are, and what they do for us. What are the ecosystem services that they provide for us? And then I'm going to get into a little bit of detail about the types of semi-natural grasslands that we have. But I'll give you some tips. How do you recognize that you have a nice grassland, a nice species-rich or semi-natural grassland? There's some easy, simple tips. I'm going to look at some of the rarest types of grasslands that we have, and then tell you a little bit about where they're found. And yeah, heads up here, yeah, they are under threat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that threaten our grasslands. What are the biggest issues? And a little bit of a focus on abandonment, which is one of the issues. I'm going to finish with positive things that are happening now and what the future might hold. So, like I said, I'm going to start quite broad. So what exactly is a grassland? Just so we're all on the same page. So it's vegetation that's composed of a perennial sward. So they're not short-lived, they're long-lived plants, they're perennial. And they're fine-lived herbaceous plants. So they've got long, thin leaves. Everybody knows what a grass looks like, long, thin leaves. And they're herbaceous plants. So that means, we don't mean that they're herbs, we don't mean it in the culinary sense. When botanists or ecologists use that term, we mean they're non-woody. So herbaceous plants mean non-woody. So they're fine-leaved, thin leaves, herbaceous plants. And normally this means you're looking at members of the grass family, or the Poaceae, that's the scientific name. To put it another way, open spaces with a variety of grasses and other low-growing plants, and where there are not many trees. So that's it in a nutshell. So on a world scale, natural grasslands are have certain characteristics, the regions where they're found. And the word natural here is important, and I'm going to come back to that. So the characteristics for areas that natural grasslands are found typically across the world usually have high populations of grazing animals, usually have subtropical climates, summer rainfall or winter drought, usually a high frequency of fires, and usually the temperature and the rainfall are kind of outside the range of comfort for tree growth, so the tree growth is inhibited. And I think you'll already realize none of these things apply to Ireland, and yet here's a screen grab of North Cork, where I'm from. Plenty grassland abounds, I can tell you, in Ireland, particularly in North Cork. So I'm going to come back to that. If these things don't apply to Ireland, why have we got so much grassland? It's just a little snapshot of some of the world's natural grasslands. So these really vast areas, vast parts of the world where grasslands are the natural vegetation. So you've got savannas in Africa, covering huge parts of Africa. We've got the prairies covering huge areas in the central parts of North America, prairie grasslands. We've got steppes. Steppe grasslands stretch all across huge areas across Russia and Mongolia. So these are just examples of some of the world's natural grasslands. These maps here show the global range. So there are others that I haven't mentioned. They're mapped slightly differently by different researchers, but you'll get the general picture. We here in Ireland are nowhere near the natural global range of grasslands. And I think this map is quite funny. We didn't even make it onto this map, so this always gives me a laugh. So why is there so much grassland in Ireland? You might reasonably ask. Well, what it is, it's the result of millennia, of thousands of years of human activity, and it's altered what was predominantly, not totally, but predominantly a wooded landscape thousands of years ago. And in Ireland, over 70% of our land is used for agriculture. And of that, 80% is devoted to grassland. And this really is one of the highest proportions in Europe. So I'll show you a figure shortly that will illustrate that nicely as well. So it really is grasslands really are a hugely important part of our landscape and what we've come to understand as our own landscape. And what this means too, and it's not a given in every country, farmers manage most of our land. So they're hugely important as custodians of our biodiversity. And much of Ireland's rich biodiversity is associated with these open habitats, grassland habitats. And these have evolved and derived from agricultural land management. So this is hugely important. Farmers are central to all of this, farmers and farming. So this map actually was shown by Jane, if anybody was on the talk, attended her talk on Wednesday evening. And it's just really a great example of, and really shows how much Ireland differs from other European countries in terms of proportion of grassland. So the red colour denotes higher percentage of grassland in the landscape. So it really shows how different we are to other parts of Europe in terms of our grassland cover. So we mentioned natural grasslands, but what's a semi-natural grassland? So it's one that has been altered by man. And it applies to pretty much all of Ireland. There are really no natural grasslands in Ireland. We could have a debate about the coastal grasslands and some coastal habitats, but mostly our grasslands are altered by man, and they've been altered by and for agriculture. But the extent to which they've been altered varies, and this is the devil's in the detail here. So we're now going to have a little look at the difference between improved grasslands, and I mean improved agriculturally, so improved grasslands versus semi-natural grasslands. So it all relates to the intensity of the farming management, the agricultural management. So in intensive agriculture, some or all of the following will apply. And the photo there is a very typical example of intensive agriculture. So you have a fairly uniform looking grass swards, the vegetation is the same height, more or less throughout, it's the same color, it's even. So this is very typical of a typical grassland that we associate with huge swathes of Ireland. And it would be a fairly intensive farming system would result in this. So every few years, this area will be ploughed and reseeded, typically with perennial ryegrass. That would be one of the most common species, maybe with clover. Fertilizer is applied. These species are chosen because they respond well to fertilizer. There would tend to be high stocking rates if there's stock on the land. And in order to keep nature at bay, and in order to just keep weeds and various other things that might impact on production, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides might form part of the picture. In order to help with economies of scale and moving farm machinery around, hedgerow and field boundary removal is often a feature, not always, but often a feature of intensive agriculture. Drainage might feature too. And then on the other end of the spectrum, and it is of course a spectrum, every farm, every field, every system, every landscape is going to be somewhere on this spectrum. So I'm kind of giving you the opposite ends. So at the other end of the spectrum to intensive agricultural management, you have extensive farming. And this is usually typified by pretty much the opposite or the lack of those things I mentioned, or less of them. So this typically wouldn't be ploughing in extensive grasslands, extensively managed grassland, little or no reseeding, little or no fertilizer, or if there is, it might be organic rather than inorganic fertilizer, low stocking densities, etc. So you can see in the photographs there, you can see there's a difference in terms of the color and the structure and the type of plants. There are more species in the lower photograph. So just to recap, natural grasslands exist, but they're usually elsewhere in the world, and they're relatively little altered by man. And in Ireland, we have semi-natural grasslands, and the rest of the talk will focus on those. And we have improved grasslands, which are used fairly intensively for agriculture, but also they can be used for amenity. Remember that our golf courses and our GAA pitches and our lawns, they're all grasslands, and they're managed intensively by humans for amenity value. So back to our semi-natural grasslands. Well, not leaving the improves behind just quite yet. This difference, making the distinction between the two, does it matter? What are the implications for nature and for biodiversity, and indeed for us? Well, the thing is, yes, it matters. In a typical improved field, like one that's used for silage or dairy, like I've shown there, you typically only have one or very few species in it. And as I mentioned, often it's a perennial ryegrass, probably the most common plant in Ireland. You will also get a handful of other species that you'll find scattered throughout these fields, along the edges of the fields, but they will be a handful of species that are really good at coping with high nutrient situations and with high competition scenarios. So things like docks and thistles and nettles. So it really is, these aren't, it's not that these species don't have value, but they are good at this kind of situation. So it's a very small suite of species that you get. Typically people call them weeds. Production will typically be high. So I'm talking about agricultural production. So in terms of your silage, your dairy, milk, your beef, meat, production will be high, but other costs are typically not accounted for. What do we lose overall in the big picture if we have no space for nature, if we have no space for wildflowers, if we have no space for a little pond, a little area of scrub. So these types of things are often not included in the balance sheet. If we take our semi-natural grassland, and I've picked a real beauty here in the photograph. This is from one of the Aran Islands. I took this last year. So again, it's right at the other end of the spectrum in terms of being very extensively managed grassland. So in a typical or in a nice semi-natural grassland, you're going to have much higher diversity. You're going to have more types of species. That's going to give you different structures. So you're going to have different heights of plants, different types of plants. The soil is going to be more varied and have higher diversity because it's interfered with less. There's less plowing, there's less chemicals going in. I mentioned that you're likely to only have one or two or a small handful of species in one of the intensively managed fields. You could have over 60 in a 2 by 2 meter study area, a quadrat in a grassland below easily. The diversity can be astounding, and that's just the plants. So you often tend to have much higher resilience when you have higher diversity. So if you have more plants, they each obviously all bring something to the table, more animals as well. So with biodiversity, you have increased choices. You've some things that are more better able to cope with drought, for example, or maybe increased rain. Who knows what the future will bring us? But also the amazing thing about biodiversity, and it's been quite well shown, the added values tend to be more than the sum of their parts. So you have much higher resilience the more biodiversity you can bring into a sward. And there's a lot of work happening in Ireland actually, and in Teagasc and with Teagasc researchers, even if you can take that upper field, which might have been reseeded with 1 or 2 species, if you can bring that up to 3 or 4 species, you can have increased production, increased resilience to drought. So aiming to have more biodiversity in and around our fields is definitely part of the name of the game. So I think this, some of you may be familiar with the series of diagrams. Now, I actually don't know who drew them. They're hugely useful. So if anybody knows, the attribution is needed. Let me know in the chat box if you know who this should be attributed to. But I think they illustrate very well. So if we look at the top one first, on the left-hand side, up at the top, we have a landscape that has a little meandering stream, lots of small fields. Looks like there's different types of agriculture happening in the fields. Got field boundaries, some hedges. There's a big clump of woodland. To the right of that, you can see a little matrix, and it's just depicting schematically the types of animals that you might find there. And down at the bottom, you've got the invertebrates, then you've got some amphibians, you've got some birds, and then you've got some larger animals and mammals up on top. So you've got room and space for all of these. You've got a place for them to live, to reproduce, shelter, food, all the things that are needed. So we can visualize that this is possible. There's space for all of these. Let's look in the middle, where you have some simplification of the landscape, some improvement, agricultural improvement. So some of the field boundaries have been removed, the woodland's gotten smaller, the number of different types of agriculture, so the number of shades of green are less. And consequently, there are less places for nature to hide out, to live, to survive, to eat, to reproduce. So we have less creatures living there. And down on the bottom, we have what a lot of modern agriculture can look like. The stream has been straightened. It's been canalized, we often call it. So it's been straightened and deepened. It's not going to provide much of a habitat for a lot of the species that might have been found there. And a lot of invertebrates have part of their life cycle in water. We've now got no woodlands, no field boundaries, and very little variety in the type of agriculture that's happening. So very few animals, very little space. There's a lovely phrase in Irish called cúine an gcruiche, and it means the corner of the hare. And apparently back in the day, it was something that all the farmers accepted. They always left little wild corners for wild animals to thrive in and to hide in and to be safe in. It was just part of farming, and that's definitely lost increasingly with increasing intensity of agriculture. So these 2 photos I just took very quickly without a great amount of effort. I took a screen grab from Google Maps from County Leitrim up on top and from County Wexford down at the bottom. And we can see examples. They tally quite well with the upper and lower parts of the drawn diagram. And this isn't at all about complaining about farmers in Wexford. There's good land. The weather's slightly better. This land can hold and can take more intensive farming. But can we do better? Can we have bigger field boundaries? Can we have little buffers along the streams? Can we make a little corner for the hare, a little cúine an gcruiche in this type of landscape? If we look up here, I think you can see, I'm moving my mouse. I think you can see my mouse. I'm looking at the upper screen now. We have lots of space for nature in this type of a landscape. There's scrub over by the edge of the lake. There's lots of big hedgerows. The fields have different colors. I can tell by the colors and textures that there's a lot of different species in them. They're not, they won't have been reseeded and plowed. They're too small anyway. In fact, some of that area of land has probably been abandoned, which we will get to, which will bring its own pluses and minuses. But can we keep farmers farming? Can we keep farming viable in this type of landscape? Can we make more space for nature in the lower one? Okay, there's a lot of text on this, so I don't need you to read it all, but I wanted to touch on some of the ecosystem services provided by grasslands. So put another way, what do grasslands do for us? What kind of things do they give us? And there's a whole science around ecosystem services, and there's a whole set of language as well. So on the left-hand side, just to kind of flag it up for you, the services, the things that habitats do can be grouped: provisioning, things they provide for us; cultural, maybe things like our mental health and well-being; regulating, if a habitat or a species feeds into some sort of a system, a big broader system that's happening. So I'll just touch on a couple. Like I said, I just want to highlight a couple of things. Obviously, semi-natural grasslands provide forage and food for our livestock, and food for us too, of course, meat and milk. And I would argue strongly that an animal that has been fed on and raised on land that supports hundreds of different types of plant species is likely to have had a more balanced diet than one that was raised on a field with just one or two species. So I think you're going to have more nutrients, more vitamins, more minerals. So I think definitely there's a difference for sure in the type of meat and food that comes from semi-natural habitats. Clearly, if you have an intensive field, intensively managed, nothing's flowering, nothing at all, because you're growing grass and you're cutting the grass or you're grazing the grass. In a semi-natural situation, there's much more space and time for things to flower. So you have pollination supported. I know myself, in terms of mental health and psychological health, if there were no more flowers, no more flowery meadows, no more flowery road verges, the world would be a poorer place and we would be the sadder for it. That is definitely for sure. There's a role for grasslands, quite a significant role in the sequestration and storage of carbon. And this is something that is often not quite as, and it certainly is lagging behind in terms of the science and the knowledge. We know that there's been a lot of work on woodlands and forests, and also on peats and peatlands and their roles in carbon cycling, but grasslands also are important, and how they're managed has a big influence on their ability to sequester or store carbon. Grasslands have a large role to play in water as well, and particularly grasslands in floodplains and rivers and any of the wet grasslands, in helping to filter water and helping to attenuate water flow. And of course, if you've got high diversity, you're looking at genetic resources and support of a really diverse suite of wild species. So down at the bottom, you'll notice there, I've given the reference for where this table came from. So if anybody's interested, they can go and look that up and find out more. And I've done that in a few places. I've put the source of the information down at the bottom so people can go find more. And even though a lot of things were covered in that table, I thought of a few more myself that I thought I might bring some attention to, as well as being a source of food for livestock. Good semi-natural grassland forms obviously a fantastic source of food for wildlife. Wild strawberry is the food plant for over 50 species of invertebrate that we know of, and devil's bit scabious for over 30, including the marsh fritillary butterfly, which is our only legally protected invertebrate in Ireland. There's a photograph of both devil's bit scabious and the marsh fritillary there. Thistles, which are often seen as a weed by most, I would say, support at least 37 species. Nettles support over 100 species of insect. And it's the main food plant for a number of our butterflies. If we had no nettles in the morning, we would lose an awful lot of our butterflies straight away. Hugely important species. And a study in the UK a couple of years ago, in less than 100 meter stretch of hedge, a farmer decided to try to list all the species he could find that were living in and on that hedge and reliant on that hedge. And he came up with a list of over 2,000 species, mostly insects. Now, mostly we can't get into that level of depth, most of us, but we just have to go with it. The better and the more semi-natural habitats we provide, we support, we create, and we retain, there are countless other creatures, plants and animals and insects, that are reliant on those. Just to mention as well, soil structure worth considering. It can help in both wet and dry times if we have good soil structure. For example, a flower-rich floodplain meadow has really absorbent soils and can capture and hold back floodwaters much more effectively than improved grasslands. And very interestingly, at the other end of the scale, if you're not looking at waterlogging, if you're looking at drought, in 2018, and we might see the same again this year, given the lack of rain the last few months. But in 2018, during the drought and towards the end of the drought, aerial imagery showed really clearly that semi-natural grasslands stayed greener than areas that were improved. And it's because there's a range of plants there. Some of those plants will have waxy leaves. They'll be able to retain moisture. Some will have deeper roots. So across the entirety of the vegetation and all the different types of plants that are there, there will be some that are better able to survive and to cope, meaning that there are still plants flourishing even in testing conditions. And while not strictly a grasslands example, I just think it's such a good example. If we allow nature to flourish in areas like semi-natural grasslands and in other areas, nature can provide very efficient pest control. It can do some of the things we try to do artificially at great cost and perhaps with chemicals that we prefer not to use so much of. It's a great example from Dutch orchards. So a very low cost, low tech idea. Some researchers put in boxes to encourage great tits to nest, hoping that they would provide some pest control. And it provided fantastic pest control. Caterpillar damage was reduced by half in the orchard that they studied, and they checked it was a really thorough survey. And it increased the harvest of apples by 1 ton per hectare per year and reduced their pesticide use massively. And what a low tech, low cost solution. So we've had a look at what grasslands, what services they provide, what they're good for. But how do you know that you're in a good grassland? How do you know that you're in a good semi-natural grassland? And so let's say you walk into a field like the one shown here in the photograph, and you're thinking, well, I think everybody would agree that it's different to our typical kind of intensive agriculture grassland. I don't think we'd argue too much over that. It definitely doesn't look uniform. Well, what are you looking for exactly to help you know if you have a good semi-natural grassland? So you're looking to see, are there lots of different species? Now, don't panic. You don't need to be able to name them. You don't even really need to know exactly what they are. You just need to see that there's lots of different things, different heights, different colors, certain things flowering. So you can quite easily see when you pay attention, and often you have to walk in the field. You really do need to walk through the field. It can be hard to tell from the gate or from the road. You'll tell if there's lots of species. As well as that, a really, really good indicator is if you have lots of broad-leaved herbs. So these are, again, so by herbs, we mean herbaceous plants, so they're non-woody, and broad-leaved herbs, so we mean not grasses. So the ratio of plants that have broad leaves compared to grasses is a really good ratio for helping you to tell how nice your grassland is, or how semi-natural it might be. Because agricultural improvement and fertilization and high stocking, all of these things give a competitive advantage to grasses. So you tend to have a higher proportion of grasses in the sward. If you have a high proportion of broad-leaved herbs, it's a very good clue. You'll often have lots of insect life, particularly if you're there in good weather. You'll have lots of moss for much the same reason as you might have a high cover of broad-leaved herbs. Mosses tend to be lost very quickly when the intensity of the agricultural management increases. There'll often be rocks. There might not be, but there'll often be rocks outcropping. There might be patches of scrub and bushes. They tell you something about the agricultural intensity, as do anthills. If you see anthills, you know that the area hasn't been ploughed. If you see rocks, it probably means the ploughing has been prevented. So these are really good pointers. If you see anthills in a grassland, go have a look. Go have a look. So look, they're often lumpy and bumpy. They're often messy looking at certain times of the year. As well, if you see orchids or sedges, sedges look like grasses to the untrained eye. They don't have very showy flowers. They're wind pollinated as well. They tend to have thin leaves that look grass-like. So if you can get your eye in for sedges, and if you see orchids, they tend to be easy to spot. Both of these are lost very, very quickly when management intensity increases. So orchids and sedges tend to be a very good indicator of semi-natural grasslands. Now, you won't see mycorrhizae, that's why I put them in brackets, but I wanted to just mention it somewhere. Mycorrhizae are underground fungi, and more we are realizing that almost all, the vast majority of our vascular plants are linked underground with these fungal networks, and they share messages. It's not quite messages, but they share nutrients, they share information chemically about whether there's grazers in the area, whether it's dry in one area, wet in another area. And these fungal networks can be absolutely huge, and they're absolutely crucial. They're damaged when we use chemicals on the soil, when we repeatedly plow the soil. So if we could see them, the mycorrhizae would tell us a lot as well, that we were in a semi-natural grassland. Okay. So those are the top tips for broadly knowing, but what different types do we have? So in order to tell you about this, I want to tell you about a couple of surveys that have been done in Ireland, which have given us very good data about our grasslands. So one of the main surveys that was done is called the Irish Semi-Natural Grassland Survey, and it was commissioned by ourselves, by National Parks and Wildlife Service, and carried out by Beck Consultants and a team of field workers, of which I was one at times. And we visited all across Ireland. Every county was surveyed. Over 1,000 sites were surveyed. And we did these vegetation quadrats, 2 by 2 meter quadrats. In almost 4,500 of these were done in different places. So we listed in detail, in great detail, the species that were present, the amount of cover, the percentage cover in the quadrats of them, and other characteristics as well. And over 23,000 hectares of grassland were mapped. And during that project, and using consequent data as well, and being updated right up to the present day, a lot of data analysis and statistics have been done. If you want to delve more into this, you can look up the Irish Vegetation Classification and see the up-to-date findings and get into great detail, and that's hosted on the website of the National Biodiversity Data Centre. But through all this work, all this data analysis, and using this really strong, comprehensive and scientifically comparable data set, we know that we have 4 main grassland groups in Ireland. So I don't want you to panic. There's no need to worry about the details about what's here on the right-hand side. Some people may be interested and may be familiar with these types of presentations of data, and in which case, by all means. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the patterns. So one of the interesting patterns that came out was, and quite strongly, you can see it circled in red on the right hand side of the upper diagram, species richness was higher on grasslands on slopes. So wondering, okay, why is it that grasslands on slopes are more species rich? Well, you know what, this is an artifact of where our species rich grasslands remain. So being found on a slope means that a grassland is less likely to have been improved, less likely to have been ploughed. So now, species richness is usually higher in grasslands, or often in grasslands on slopes. Obviously, it doesn't mean that every grassland on a slope is species rich. The converse isn't always true. What is usually true is that species richness is usually lowest on soils with high fertility. And I explained that a lot of grasses and a lot of competitive species will gain the advantage in situations of high fertility. So you have less number and breadth of species in that type of situation. Some of the other big dividers in terms of helping us to separate the different types of grasslands, the pH of the soil, so whether the soil is acid or alkaline, or acid or calcareous, and conversely the percentage of organic matter. This helped to separate out grassland types, and so too did the wetness and dryness. No surprises there. So there are 4 grassland types, like I mentioned, and they're separated out using these types of patterns. It came out quite neatly, quite tidily, quite intuitively when you spend the time and get into the data. And the grasslands have been given scientific names, which I'm not going to, long-winded scientific names, I'm not going to show those. They've also been given codes. I've shown them here on the lower picture, GL1, GL2, 3 and 4. But I'm going to go through them now and just give a little description and a photograph for each one and help you maybe try to picture them in your mind's eye, these 4 grassland types. So the first one is a species poor damp or wet grassland that you find on fertile soils, usually on flat land. So think here of your typical rushy field. There's lots of them. If you live in or have ever been in anywhere in the west of Ireland, you can probably picture a rushy field. A lot of these types of grasslands might grade into a more improved category as well. So GL1 is the other wet grassland type. These are often on peaty soils, clay soils. They tend to have a variable species richness, but it tends to be less. And the species richness often varies with the soil fertility. But you can picture in your mind's eye maybe a more species rich or a low nutrient type of wet field. So there'll be more going on. It won't just be a rushy field. GL3, the third type. These tend to be species rich grasslands. They're on calcareous soils, usually nutrient poor, sometimes on slopes. What you can picture in your mind's eye here is maybe a Burren grassland or a grassland from an esker that hasn't been agriculturally improved. And the last one, GL4. So these tend to be species rich. They can be on neutral to acid soils, usually nutrient poor, and often on slopes. And here, if you want to picture in your mind's eye, you could think of maybe an upland acid grassland, perhaps like the one in the photograph. So just to give you a very broad idea, all of these are broken down into further subcategories. Some are very species rich, some less so. Obviously, there's a lot of variety, but just to give you a general overview. And I want to talk about some of the impacts and some of the distributions of grassland types. And actually, our most detailed data are for a smaller suite, a subset of grasslands that are really quite special. And they've been listed on the Habitats Directive, the EU Habitats Directive, because they're rare or uncommon or threatened at a EU scale. So I'm going to focus on 4 grassland types that are listed on the Habitats Directive, and then I'm going to show you information about distribution and threat for those grasslands, because they're the ones we have the best data for. So there are 4 of these. We call them the annex grassland types because they're listed on the annex of the Habitats Directive. There's a lingo that goes with everything, isn't there? So these are the 4 of our Habitats Directive annex listed grassland types. So they have quite long-winded scientific names, which I'm not giving you. I'm giving you kind of summary names here. So the first one is orchid-rich calcareous grassland. The second one is species-rich nardus grassland. Nardus is a grass species. The third one is Molinia meadow. Molinia is also a grass species. And lowland hay meadow. So each one has a code, so there's no need to worry about it. And you'll see the first 2 have an asterisk as well. And the asterisk denotes that they're a priority habitat. And this means that even at an EU level, even though they're on a list for being uncommon and rare, these are really the rarest of the rare. So these are quite important habitat types. So each country, each member state has a really strong responsibility to work hard for their conservation and management. So you're probably thinking, God, another 4 types. Well, look, I've actually shown you photographs of 3 of them already. I've shown you, in showing you examples of the more broader habitat types, I've shown you examples of really the best of the best. So look, this photograph was an example of orchid-rich calcareous grassland, the annex type. It comes from the Burren, just near Karen. This is an example on this hillside, maybe not all of it, but parts of this hillside have beautiful examples of species-rich nardus grassland, so the upland grassland. This was GL4. This is from I think it's just inside the border, South Mayo. And this photograph was an example of Molinia meadow. This is from Glenismole near County Dublin, where there are some lovely examples of grasslands. So the only one I hadn't shown a photograph of was lowland hay meadow. So perhaps one of our rarest, or the rarest type of these special grasslands that we have in Ireland. So I'm going to show you now some maps so you get a feeling for where these are found. And on these maps, what I want you to focus on are the squares with the red hatched lines. So this is the map for orchid-rich calcareous grassland. And so you'll see that it's kind of linked with, as you can imagine, where the calcareous, or where the limestone land is in Ireland, where the limestone is distributed. If we were looking at a geological map, it wouldn't be hugely dissimilar. So across the Midlands and stretching up a little bit into the northwest, some coastal sites as well. And this map shows the distribution of species-rich nardus grassland. So this is the upland acid grassland, and you can see it's quite different. It's found, not surprisingly, it's found mainly in upland areas and mainly where there's acid ground. So there isn't a huge coincidence between these 2 different types of grasslands. And I should mention as well, before I move to the next 2, these are the grasslands that we know about, and they won't all have had detailed surveys, but we do know that the types of grasslands exist here. There are likely to be other places where these grasslands are found, but these really are the rarest and the most special types of grasslands. There are semi-natural grassland, much more broadly distributed across Ireland. These are likely to be their distribution is likely to be quite accurately portrayed in these maps. So this is the map for Molinia meadows. So you can see it's more broadly distributed, but still there's very much a northwestern slant on the distribution. And finally, the lowland hay meadows. So you'll notice there is a dearth of squares with these red diagonal lines. showing us where it currently occurs. There's some in County Clare, there's some in some coastal areas along the Shannon Callows and some of the less intensively used areas, some in the Moy Valley in Mayo. But it really is a habitat that is undergoing a strong decline, and it's very strongly linked with how we manage and where and how hay is made. So just put them all up there together so we get a snapshot. And I thought I would also show this map, which was produced by Irish researchers, showing the likelihood of occurrence of HNV farmland. So some of you would be familiar with that term, high nature value farmland. And what it is, it's extensively managed farmland. So if you remember, the opposite to intensively managed. So extensively managed farmland, typically high in and good for biodiversity. And again, you'll see on the map that in general, there's a high likelihood. By the way, the little divisions are townlands. So you'll see there's a very high likelihood of having high nature value farmland along the western seaboard, less so as you move across the Midlands. And then there's a diagonal running kind of, let me move my image. There's a diagonal running kind of from northern Meath down to Cork of areas where you have much more intensive agriculture. The landscape is used differently. And so there's a much less or lower likelihood of finding HNV farmland. So you'll see it's no coincidence, really. We do have the majority of our nice grasslands are in the west and the northwest. But I will say that means that each and every example, each and every fragment that's found, for example, in Leinster and Munster, where these nice grasslands are less common because of the agricultural intensity, these are all the more precious for that, because of their isolation and because they're remnants of something that would have been much more widespread. So, we've put names on them. We've talked about how do you recognize them in general. We've an idea where they're found in Ireland. So let's have a look. Are our semi-natural grasslands under threat? And look, it won't be a surprise to anybody to hear that they are. So I've mentioned already the Irish Semi-Natural Grassland Survey. To follow that up, NPWS commissioned the Grasslands Monitoring Survey, which ran 2015 to 2017. And the idea was to revisit a subset of the best of the grasslands to see how they're doing, to monitor them, and to be able to report back on what's happening. The average time that elapsed between the two surveys, so was about 6 years. So between when they were visited first and when they were visited for their monitoring. And in that time, rather alarmingly, 31% of the calcareous grasslands that were visited were gone. They were no longer present, or they were no longer classifiable as species-rich calcareous grasslands. To give you an idea of how many were visited, it was a much smaller subset in the monitoring survey, but 55 sites were visited, and that covered 17% of the known area of the habitat in Ireland. So it's quite significant. For Molinia meadows, 7% of the habitat was gone, 33 sites were visited, and 30% of the known area was included in that. And for hay meadows, almost 30% was gone. 40% of the known habitat area was visited. So these figures are alarming, but unfortunately, they're probably also underestimates because they're from a subset of the best sites. Losses in the wider countryside are likely to be higher. Now, as a slight counterfoil to that, and it's only slight, it is likely that there are huge swathes of maybe not quite annex quality, these are the best communities, but there are going to be large areas of good quality semi-natural grassland that we haven't yet mapped, that we aren't yet aware of, that we aren't yet including in these figures. And they will be performing many functions. They provide homes for a lot of these species. So they will counteract the figures and the loss a little bit, but not much and not enough. And it still stands that this loss and this change and this degradation is happening. So let me tell you about individually for 3 of the habitats now, what are the main threats? What are the things that are causing these losses? Because this data was collected as part of that survey. So for the calcareous grasslands, 65% of the negative activities recorded related to abandonment and lack of grazing or mowing. It was more usually grazing. So abandonment is a huge issue. At the other end of that spectrum, agricultural intensification and quarrying were high intensity impacts where they occurred, of course. Quarrying is an issue, for example, on esker sites, which support a lot of species-rich calcareous grasslands. Positive impacts recorded at over three quarters of them related to grazing. So we have non-intensive, so where you have appropriate levels of grazing. And it was a range of grazing species, cattle, horses, and sheep, all featured. So in summary, habitat loss is the largest threat, and the remaining habitat, however, is suffering heavily from abandonment and the associated effects. And grazing is needed, so it's clear. So what about Molinia meadows? So over 50% of the 16 negative impacts which were recorded related to abandonment. And the other main threats were forestry and recent drainage. So the biggest threat for these habitats, it's not so much loss. There was loss, but not at the same scale as the other habitats. It's more about degradation. So abandonment, intensification, part of a site being lost to forestry. These are the threats. And for lowland hay meadows, by far the biggest threat is agricultural intensification. It was the most frequent negative threat, and the next most frequent was fertilization, which of course is linked. And the third then was abandonment. So a familiar picture of these two ends of the spectrum which cause the problem. So in summary, lowland hay meadows are the most threatened, and even small amounts of intensification, even just the application of natural fertilizers such as slurry, can cause a change. They're very sensitive plant communities to change. So broadly speaking, intensification on the one hand and abandonment on the other are not needed. Grasslands are a bit like Goldilocks. It needs to be just right. Other issues, there are lots of other issues. I mentioned deforestation. It is likely to become more of an issue in the future as we have policy-led and policy-driven afforestation of so-called marginal areas. Or marginal areas might be marginal in terms of production, but they certainly are not marginal in terms of biodiversity and provision of ecosystem services. So the message of having the right tree in the right place is a message that we're going to need to fight hard to make sure we get across. I'm not going to go through any of the others. I suppose I should touch on the last one though. I don't think that wildflower mixes are a huge threat to our semi-natural grasslands really. However, just in the last few years, we've had the whole-scale introduction of non-native plants into our towns and villages and even into our fields in very well-meaning activities. Sometimes the species are native, they're technically a native species, but they're from not of local provenance. And this is definitely something that we want to do only very carefully and probably in environments that are already altered. There is no place really for a wildflower mix in a semi-natural grassland. Now, harvesting seeds from a nearby species-rich grassland, yes, that's entirely different. So just to mention that. So talking about the threats and the impacts, what are some of the knock-on effects of these threats and impacts? So I just found this study from the UK quite interesting. So I want to give it as an example of some of the knock-on effects. Often we lack maybe some of the cold hard figures that they have for the UK. 97% of UK meadows have been lost since the 30s. I don't have a similar figure to give you for Ireland, but I can tell you the scale will be similar, but the change will have happened more recently. Our changes have happened largely since the 70s, when we joined the EU and when we started to really mechanize and ramp up our agriculture. So the scale of the change similar, but the time frame much shorter. So this study looked at extinctions. So 10 grassland plant species went extinct in the UK in the last 60 years. You might think that's sad, but it's not huge. But it does hide the real extent of the losses. So they started to look at a county by county level. And they discovered when they did this, that species are being lost. This is grassland species now, at a rate of 1 species per year per county. And that is quite alarming. And the rate of loss is accelerating. Lowland counties were losing more species than upland ones. Densely populated counties were losing more species than rural ones. So I think these are quite interesting trends. And worrying. But what about Irish species? So I'm going to give you kind of a broader picture about Irish plant species. And this is from the very recently published, and it's available to download from the NPWS website, the publications section. So it's a red list for vascular plants in Ireland. So they examined all our vascular plant species. They used agreed kind of criteria that are used globally to look at our species. And they have grouped the species into different categories. And I've just looked at the time, so I realize I need to speed up. So The nub of it is 15 species have become extinct in Ireland. I think the time frame was looking back to 1970, and a further 17% are in the threatened categories. So that means overall about 1 in 5 species almost is either extinct or endangered in Ireland, and that is worrying. As a piece of good news, meadow saxifrage was on the regionally extinct list. We thought it was gone. It hadn't been seen in decades, and a colony was refound a couple of years ago, 2 years ago in Wicklow. So that is a piece of good news, but one colony is not enough. That plant is still at huge risk. I'm going to very, very quickly mention the birds as examples of other Irish species. Again, you can see the corncrake is a well-known story. In the 1970s, we had 4,000, at the start of the 1970s, we had 4,000 calling males. By the early 90s, we were down to about 200 animals calling males. And that has stayed stubbornly low in spite of much effort. And it's about broadly how we farm our landscape. And again, the loss of haymaking, it's brought about a huge change, and other birds have suffered a similar fate, other farmland birds. And I'm looking at my time and thinking that I need to move on quite quickly. So I am going to flick through these so that I have time to get to the end. And some of the positive things that are happening. And I want to leave plenty of time for questions too. So what is being done? There are a lot of good things happening that might hopefully change the fate of some of our best semi-natural grasslands. So I'm going to mention a lot of different things. I'm going to mention GLAS. It's our agri-environment scheme. There's over 50,000 participants. It's quite a large amount of money goes to support it. It's administered by the Department of Agriculture. It does include measures for biodiversity. But look, it's a national scheme. The measures by necessity are quite broad brush. They're quite general. And a lot of farming situations need a much more tailored approach and more tailored scenarios. So what we need more of, and what we are starting to see, and in fact we're leaders in Ireland in this area, are more locally led schemes. So results-based agri-environment schemes. So by locally led, I mean that farmers on the ground are involved in the setting up, the designing, and they're the impetus behind it. They're involved from start to finish. And by results-based, we mean that you don't just get a payment for having X number of animals or for cutting on such a date. You get, if the aim is to have a species-rich grassland at the end, you get your payment relative to how successfully you have produced a species-rich grassland. It allows a great amount of flexibility to local situations, local farming norms, and it really is the way to go. There's a book, we've got great examples in Ireland. Burren Life and now the Burren programme is obviously a leading light in that. But if you want to know more, there's a book just published, freely available to download. It's called Farming for Nature. You can download it from the NPWS website, from Teagasc, I think, as well. So go have a look, and it outlines an awful lot of the successful examples. We also, in Ireland, are leading the way in terms of these European innovation partnerships. We've got 23 of them up and running, and they are all somehow involved in looking for local solutions to farming and agricultural and rural life. And you can go and look some of those up. I'll show a map in a second. There are projects spread all around the country, all looking at finding locally tailored, relevant solutions that make a difference. They make a difference for the farmers, and they make a difference for nature. National Parks and Wildlife Service, we have a farm plan scheme. There's about 40 plans in operation at the moment. We're going to be more than doubling that in the next 6 months or a year. And this provides a great way for us to give really tailored support to farmers in sometimes really the nicest of situations in terms of habitats and species and biodiversity, but sometimes some of the trickiest areas to farm, to make your farming viable and worthwhile. So it's a great way to be able to support farmers. And there are lots of existing projects like life projects, Kerry Life. There are projects coming down the line, and lots of other projects like leader projects and Interreg, many of which are dealing and interacting with farming, how areas are farmed, and looking for always win-win situations. Can we keep farmers farming? Can we keep it viable and appealing as a way of life? And can we also have space for nature and farm in a way that allows us to have nature continue to exist and to thrive? I'm not going to dwell on the European Innovation Partnerships. I urge you to go and Google it, look it up, have a look at the schemes that are nearest to you, see what's happening out there. There really are fantastic projects happening. In terms of what else is happening, so this is really a raggle-taggle bunch of ideas and thoughts and examples. I think peer-to-peer sharing and learning between farmers is such a powerful tool. Having a scientist or a bureaucrat or a policymaker ask or tell a farmer to do something is only going to go so far, and that's not far at all. What we need is farmers sharing their positive experiences, sharing their love of nature, sharing what worked well, what didn't work well. And Farming for Nature is a great example of an organization that provides a platform and a way for farmers to share in such a way. Their farm walks are fantastic. I urge you to go on one when we're all get the green light to go and walk on farms again. We also need to share joy and wonder. We need to educate, and across all generations. People will only care about and act for things that they get joy from. So we need to open people's eyes. Burren Trust is a great example of an organization that does this in a number of different ways. We also need to educate ourselves in terms of what are the different plants? What do they look like? How do I tell them? So the BSBI is a great organization for getting to the nitty-gritty of this. Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland. And jointly with them, I have a project this year. They're going to lead on it. We're going to have a series of webinars helping people to identify grasses, to tell different grasslands apart. Hopefully we'll roll this project on, trying to get out to see some great grassland sites in future years. So you can look that up on the BSBI website. Very quickly, there's lots of great work happening in the natural capital kind of area. Irish Forum for Natural Capital, the INCASE, I-N-C-A-S-E, the INCASE project out of Trinity. There's a lot of work happening with people trying to help put a value, monetary often, but not always, on different aspects of nature so that people who don't already understand the value might start to take account of it. So it's a very important space to be working in. It's also very important that we do our best to provide practical information that's easy to digest. And if you want a good example, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, if you're not already familiar, go look up their website. They've got sector-specific information. It's easy to access, easy to read, very practical. It's a great example of how to provide the information that's needed to the people that need it. Other good things that are happening, a lot of the local authorities I've mentioned too, because I've interacted with them in the last few weeks. There are going to be lots of other examples. South Dublin County Council and Dún Laoghaire. These lovely ladies, these three ladies in the photograph are drimming cattle, and they go on their summer holidays from Kerry up to Dublin to Fernhill Park in South Dublin, and they graze the meadows there. It's a fantastic example of a conservation grazing project. So, very, very quickly, what does the future hold? Well, look, there are clearly large positive ventures, but there are huge and widespread challenges to our semi-natural grasslands, and realistically, declines are likely to continue. But hopefully these can be tempered and even stalled in the midterm. It's going to take a lot of different people working together, a lot of awareness raising, a lot of dialogue and collaboration, policy change, and plenty more. So I think it's time for my take-home messages. And anybody that knows me, I'm not good at keeping my messages short. So I don't just have 2 or 3, I have a good few. Farming is central. In the story of semi-natural grasslands, farming is central, and we must keep farmers farming. Management is needed if we're going to maintain our semi-natural grasslands. But we must manage more of our grasslands more sensitively. It needs to be win-win, it needs to be good for nature, but it needs to be viable for farmers. And we do need to accept, and this is happening in parts of Ireland, it's happened in the Burren already, we need to accept that grass or animal production shouldn't be the only aim for every inch of our grassland. We should be willing and able to value and support farmers to produce areas that are good for wildlife, for flood control, for supporting our pollinators, etc., etc. We need to care for the soil. We need to think about it more. We need to think about how we farm and how we manage land and how we incentivize and devise policies impacts on the soil long term. And for everyone, for not just the farmers, Ireland has fantastic semi-natural grasslands, so I'd urge you to get to know them. Continue to educate yourself. Join an NGO, take part in the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. You don't have to be a farmer. You don't even have to have a garden. You can have window boxes. You can join your tidy towns. It's a great way to get involved. Go on events that are organised by the Heritage or Biodiversity officers in your county. Share with others that semi-natural grasslands are really important. Make them visible. So I think my main message, let's get people thinking and talking and acting on semi-natural grasslands. Okay. That's it. Thank you very much.
Hi, Maria. That was Utterly fabulous. Really, really well done. That was a really interesting talk now, and really well presented. I think Andy Bleasdale has just written into chat exactly a really nice, it just says, great presentation, Maria. You gave a very clear explanation of the differences between natural and semi-natural grasslands, intensive and extensively managed grasslands, how to recognise these differences, the roles of farmers and farming, the choices we make, and the consequences of these choices. And you did all of this in a balanced way and without using the words good or bad. Well done. So I think Andy there has kind of summed up the overall general how we all feel after that. So it was a fabulous talk. Thank you. Now I think we've got time for some questions here, if you don't mind, if you're not too exhausted after that. So there's a question, kind of two questions here from someone, anonymous attendee. They're both pretty similar. So the first one says, do you have any thoughts on the rewilding argument and how it might affect grasslands? And can intensive grasslands be returned to more biodiverse grasslands?
Yes, so as it happens, I am midway through reading a fantastic book called Wilding, and it's written by Isabella Tree, and it's all about the big, huge rewilding experiment that is a couple of decades in at Knepp Castle, and it's a great read. It's a fantastic read. I think also it provides a lot of balance, because some people think that rewilding involves us walking away, and we do nothing more, humans out, that's it. And you know what? I don't think that's good enough, because we've altered the landscape, we've damaged it. There are now different suites of species. We've left weeds and invasive species behind. We've changed things. So I don't think we can walk away. So I think a lot of what what I might be advocating, can we manage the land more sensitively? Can we let our hedgerows grow wild? Can we allow big buffer zones along our streams? A lot of this can fit really nicely in rewilding. So I want to rewild the landscape, but still have a place for farmers and farming. So I think it sits quite nicely. Yeah.
Thanks, Maria. The next question is from Paddy Tobin. Is there any resource where I might find a list of locations of natural grasslands near me? He's writing from Waterford.
There isn't a nice neat list, but what you could do is you could go on to the website of the National Parks and Wildlife Service and look at the maps. And if you look at the maps of designated areas, you can see where your nearest SAC, Special Area of Conservation, or your nearest NHA, Natural Heritage Area. And if you click on them, they'll often have grassland in the name, or you can click on them and go and look at the site synopsis, and it tells you whether, what it's designated for. So if it's got nice grasslands, it will tell you there. So it isn't a nice short list, but it does, that would be one way that you could find out what's nearby in terms of the, some of the nicest habitats.
Lovely, thank you. I should have mentioned as well that if anyone who is still watching and wants to add any questions or ask anything, you just use the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. Your questions are popping up for us. So there's another question here now, Maria, about, you mentioned carbon sequestration in grasslands. Is there any data on which type of grasslands sequester the highest amounts of carbon? Thanks, really great talk and very clear presentation.
Cool. Yes, but there's some conflicting data as well. So it's something that isn't really my area of expertise, and it's something that I really need to spend some time sorting through the data. What we do know is that there's more carbon probably sequestered and stored in organic soils, and some of our grasslands are on organic soils, so on peaty soils. So wet peaty soils, if they've got lovely species-rich grasslands and aren't being too intensively managed, they're probably going to have the highest amounts of carbon sequestered. But it's really important to remember that all grassland soils and all soils will store and potentially emit or sequester carbon. So they're all part of the picture, but I guess the ones on peaty soils are the ones, if you're looking for the ones with the biggest numbers.
This anonymous attendee has written, can you turn old permanent pasture into lowland hay meadow? Does it require reseeding with a special mix, or is it simply reducing the fertilizer and pesticide inputs?
It depends on what your old permanent pasture is. So if your old permanent pasture is already nice or has the potential to be very nice, I wouldn't be reseeding. I wouldn't be doing too much. So I'm a big advocate, as are a lot of ecologists, of trying to work with what's there. But in short, let's just say that your old permanent pasture sounds nice, doesn't it? But let's just say that it's not that nice. Yes, you can reseed. You can add seeds in. Sometimes people just try to, for example, maybe add in yellow rattle. It's like the secret weapon of people that are looking to decrease the vigor of the grasses and make more space for other species. So for example, you could try putting in some yellow rattle. If you, like going in and reseeding, plowing and reseeding is a very drastic thing to do. You release silt, you release carbon, you're changing everything. If you can work with what's there, that would always be the first choice. So I don't know if I can answer that question without knowing a little bit more about what the starting point.
Well, he does. I think he's added the permanent, he or she has added the permanent pasture is not species diverse. So yeah.
So look, again, the best thing is always the least intervention. But if you sometimes want, if you're really starting from a poor, species poor kind of standpoint, it might be worth it to go in and just do a big species reseed. Again, you really are better off trying to collect seed locally and trying to use locally provenance seeds that you've just harvested, you know, from a nice field somewhere nearby that day, that week. That is the best way to do it. But there's great potential. If anybody just if you don't have time to read the whole book, go and have a Google. There's lots of newspaper articles and there's lots on the web about the Nep Castle estate. Their land was heavily used for arable, and now it's got the most fantastic biodiversity. It just knocks the socks off loads of other sites where conservationists have been working so hard trying to entice back in rare species and birds that were thought lost. So it's amazing what you can do on even the most impoverished land by just making that space and making the management changes.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great. There's a lovely question. I can't actually see where it is on the list now, but I thought it was a really nice question now. It said, which of the 4 annexed grasslands is your favourite?
Oh.
A different one.
Oh, I think it's got to be the calcareous grasslands, the species-rich calcareous grasslands. I gotta love the Burren. I love Eskers. That you just can't beat the color. You can't beat the species diversity. It reminds me of sunny days, even though I did many days of fieldwork in the rain, I can tell you. So yeah, I think the species-rich, orchid-rich calcareous grassland.
I think I'm going to have to take the last question, Maria, and apologies to everyone whose questions we're not able to ask today. Grania Burke has asked, can you tell us where to get and how to sow yellow rattle?
So one of the things that we lack in Ireland is lots and lots of seed suppliers. There are a few, I won't mention them because there's so few, I don't want to be endorsing anybody. So you could Google some seed suppliers, you'll be able to buy some seed if you want, but we really don't have enough seed suppliers in Ireland. The best thing is to go find some yellow rattle somewhere near you, or travel to somewhere nice that is yellow rattle. Go in late summer and try and collect some seed. It's an annual plant, so it's something that you might need to, well, if it goes well the first year and your plants grow well, they'll set their own seed and you'll have your yellow rattle year on year. So I think, yeah, have a look online for seed sources, or go look later in the summer for yellow rattle and collect the seed.
Is it just a matter
don't
of
ever collect seed unless you see lots of the plant around. So if you just see a tiny clump of yellow rattle, please don't touch it. But it can be very common when you do find it.
And is it just a matter of scattering it in whatever way you're grassing at the moment?
Not quite. If you have a very dense grassland sward, you want to make some gaps. You want to make some gaps for the yellow rattle. So if you go out with a rake, if you go out with a little trowel, and just physically, if you're talking a lawn, if you're talking a small area, you know, near your house, you can do that by hand. If you're talking larger fields, you probably want to scarify with some machinery. Just make some bare ground. Yeah.